Our ancestors lived in a narrow, dark, and heavy place. They were slaves, the Hebrews, like our original ancestors. They were slaves in Egypt, and all they could see was the brick and mortar that was right in front of them. They wouldn't dare to look up because, God forbid, they would see the hopelessness. God forbid they would feel the despair. God forbid they wouldn't see their future. And so they narrowed their lives just to see what was right in front of them, just to see the task in front of them. And then just in case we miss the narrowness, the darkness of their lives, when they are about to be freed, God, through Moses, sends these 10 plagues that, yes, hurt the Egyptians, but the Hebrews were there too. And the second to last plague was this plague of darkness. A darkness, our tradition says, was so dark, so heavy that you could feel it on your body. It was so dark that you couldn't see the person next to you. This darkness that was all-consuming. And then they were freed. They were freed, and the first thing that they see is the expanse of the Red Sea. The first thing they look out onto is that promise of water, of redemption, of renewal. But then it gets even better. The sea splits. They witness miracle. They witness awe, possibly for the first time in their lives. And as they're walking through the Red Sea, these words cross their lips that we say at almost every service that we join together in, Mi chamocha ba'ilim Adonai, who is like you, Adonai our God. It's a song of awe. It's a song of faith. It's a song of hope. And so that's why we continue it at every service. But I'm not really convinced. I'm not really convinced that this whole group of once slaves, like a day ago slaves, was just hopeful, just had awe. I think that the song of their soul, the song of their heart, was probably a little bit different. In Hametzar Karatia Anani Bamechavia Hametzar Karatia Anani Bamechavia Min Hametzar Karatia Anani Bamerchavia. From the narrow place, from the narrow straits, I call out to you, God, and I am answered from God's great expanse. This line of poetry from Psalm 118 is some of the best poetry in the Jewish canon. It's gorgeous, and particularly gorgeous in the Hebrew. So I'm going to break it down for us, the whole thing. We're going to get through it, I promise, just so we can get a taste of what this line could feel like. So min hametzar, min, from hametzar, from the narrow place, from the narrow straits, the narrow place, an actual place, or perhaps the narrowness for ourselves. Metzar, this word that comes, is the same root for the word for Egypt, Mitzrayim. From Egypt, from the Egypt of our ancestors, or from our own Egypts, from our own narrow places, karati Yah, I call out to God. But God here is not Adonai or Elohim, those words that we usually use for God. It's Yah, this like open-mouthed, breathy expression of God. We like have to use our lungs in order to say it, Yah. And then Anani, I'm answered. I feel like that's always our question for prayers. Like, if I pray, will I actually be answered? And the answer here from our psalmists is yes, you will be answered, but not with like the 100 on your test. And as a heartbreak, not by healing our loved ones, but rather, b'merchavia, you'll be answered by expanse, answered by looking up, answered by hope, answered by opportunity, answered by a great expanse. We all have Meitzars in our life. We all have narrow moments in our life. Each one of us have had acute Meitzars in our life, moments where we've lost someone that we've loved, moments where our own illness or those of that we love have really caused us some pain, breakups, job loss, moments of acute narrowness where all we can see is the brick and mortar in front of us and we don't dare look up because we're so scared of what might be out there. We're so scared of the hopelessness that might be out there. We're so scared that there might not be an out there, and so we just look down, we get through it. We sort of white knuckle it. That's an acute meitzar that each of us have felt by being loving humans. But for many of us, there is also a daily meitzar, a daily narrowness that changes the way in which we think, changes our behavior, changes what we believe. It is a meitzar that looks like being out with friends or family for an entire day. It's joyous, it's fun, coming home and only being able to think about the one thing you said that you think was super stupid, or the one thing you said that you think pissed someone off. And now suddenly you start to ruminate over it and you think about it again and again and again. And now suddenly a whole day that was fun and joyous with the people that you love is now a day of pain and suffering. That narrowness. Or perhaps it is looking in the mirror and only being able to see, only having a narrow vision of what our body looks like. Only being able to see the parts that are too big or the parts that are too small or the parts that don't look like other people's parts. And not being able to see the expansiveness that is a holy body, the expansiveness that is this body that we were given, that is created in the divine image. Perhaps it's the narrowness of being 2 minutes late for work and snowballing those 2 minutes into thinking that everyone at work thinks that you are the worst employee ever because of these 2 minutes of being late. And that's what we focus on. We don't focus on the great work that we do every day, but rather on these 2 minutes. I don't need to cite the statistics for you about the mental health pandemic in our country. I don't need to tell you that 1 in 5 adults, American adults, suffer from a mental illness. I don't need to tell you that that number feels really low because of lack of reporting. I also need to tell you this because we know it. We know it from talking to our people. I know it from talking to our teens who are smart and wonderful and struggling. I know it from talking to all of you who are trying so hard to make a name for yourself and get out there in a career and figure out who you are, and it just feels like you keep going and going and going, and there's no stop, and what if it doesn't happen? I know it from talking to young parents, to old parents who are still traumatized by raising children in this pandemic and figuring out how to make it work each and every day. I know it from talking to widows and widowers who, years later, are still trying to figure out who they call in an emergency. It is a pandemic in our country. It is something each of us know and feel, even if it's not ourselves. We know it and feel it because we love others, or perhaps because we feel it within ourselves. So how do we get out of it? How do we get out of those narrow places and find expanse? Our psalmist tells us. It gives us some clues. Number 1, karatiyah. Call out to God. And God here can take many different forms. God can take the form of a friend or a family member or a therapist or a general practitioner. Call out to God. Our ancestors were brave enough to call out for help. We can too. It's a crazy thing about asking for help. No one ever wants to do it. We don't want to be a burden. We don't want to ask other people to help us. And yet, have you ever been asked for help and not loved it? Like, it's a wonderful thing to be asked for help, particularly if you love the person who's asking. Someone you love is in pain and they're saying, actually, this could help me, and you could relieve some of it. That is wild. Like, what a wild moment. What a gift you could give to somebody by asking for help, by karatiyah. And then it's not like an accident that that's the name of God that is used in this psalm. You have to use your breath when you say this name of God. You have to open your mouth and exhale to say it. There's a psychologist, and Dr. Wendy Suzuki, who wrote a book about anxiety, who says that the one thing that sort of seriously does help, the biggest tool we have in dealing with anxiety, depression, acute moments of mental illness or hurt, is your breath. In my words, change your breath, and you can change your outlook from narrow to expanse. Deep breathing, slow your breath. Change the way in which your blood circulates throughout your body. Change the way in which our body feels like fight or flight, and then can release. If that's not your thing, go the other direction. Get your blood going. Get your breath up. Exercise. Get outside. Changing your breath can change the way in which we find expanse. And lastly, Anani b'merchavia, we are answered from God's great expanse. One of the greatest sources of expanse in our world is religion. I was a chaplain at Mount Sinai Hospital a few summers ago, and I still remember them sharing this statistic with us that people who entered the hospital and checked the box of identifying with a religion, didn't matter which one. If you just identified with a religion as you came in, your outcomes in the hospital were better than if you didn't. It's not because God has an ear for us, although that'd be nice. It's because religion gives us strength and resilience. Religion gives us hope. It gives us something bigger to hold on to when those hard and difficult moments happen. It gives us something to look out for. It gives us community. And the tool that you have as someone just walking down the street, if you have religion, is prayer. Jews are really bad at praying, horrible at praying. We are really good at, I didn't grade all of you tonight, but we're really good at coming here together in community. We are really good, oh my God, you guys are so good at using your voices to pray. I love praying with all of you. We are really bad at individual prayer. We're really bad at the day-to-day saying what we need from God or from whatever being or from the life source, whatever it is, or from ourselves of what we need. And so some tips on prayer. God and spirituality are not your thing, totally okay. Prayer can look like you putting your hand on your heart and saying, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. Perhaps you love Jewish prayer, you just don't know a lot of it. Great. If you have grown up in a religious school, which I know not all of us did, at age 5, you learned a prayer that you can say from the drop of a hat. In the moments that get tough or hard, you can take a breath and say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And for a second, you can change your outlook and you can remember that you can listen and hear differently, that you can be part of a oneness that is this world, that you can be part of a God that is bigger than you, that actually the little things that are going on in your life, in the grand scheme of things, because there's a larger world out there, it's okay. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Or perhaps you are quite the learned Jew. Perhaps you're here all the time, but somehow your prayer stops when you leave those doors. There are moments where we are walking down the street and we feel scared. Great, recite Hashkivenu. Recite a prayer for protection or shelter, or moments when we are feeling small or we want to feel smaller. Sometimes we want to feel protected. Adon Olam is a great one that says, God, you are so big and so great, I couldn't possibly. Thanks for being mine. Thanks for being mine. Or perhaps you are a rabbi who taught about the Psalms a few months ago, and one melody just stuck in my ear. One melody just became an earworm, and it stayed with me and stayed with me. And suddenly I realized it wasn't just a melody, it was these words that was giving me strength and resilience. It was these words that were taking me out of a narrow place and into expanse. A writer for the New York Times, Christina Karen, wrote about anxiety, wrote about mental health, and she shared how, or phobia actually, she shared how she's terrified of driving. And so for most of her adult life, she didn't drive. And that meant that she narrowed her life to New York City. Not so narrow. Not so narrow. Totally was working fine for her until the pandemic. And then suddenly it became really narrow. And at this point she had kids and they wanted to go rent a house in the Adirondacks and she needed to be able to drive to get there. And so she karatiyah. She called out not to a friend or a family member or to a therapist or general practitioner. She called out to God in the form of a driving instructor. And she started lessons with him. And at some point she shared just how fearful she was, just how scared she was. And he said, that's okay. The fear is never going to go away. You're just going to figure out how to override it. That day that they were going to drive to Adirondacks, she shared that she called the driving instructor. She karatiyat one more time. She took a deep breath. It doesn't say in the article, but I'm pretty sure that she prayed to God for safety. And she got into the driver's seat. And her 4-year-old daughter, who had been watching her do this now for 8 weeks, said, look, mommy's the driver. And she proudly said, I am. The Hebrews had the entire expanse of the Red Sea in front of them. Christina had the expanse of the open road. This evening, today, Yom Kippur, we have the expanse of the open gates. This year is open in front of us. Who we are, who we can be is open in front of us. How this year do we want to take some time to think about our narrow spaces, to think about our narrow places, and to think about the ways in which we want to push them down and come out and embrace expanse.